Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly book study. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here for our weekly book study. And we are on chapter 11. I love this chapter. There is only one self. And as you read in your email notification, Susan Telford is taking Jenny's place this week, even though Jenny is here. Hi, Jenny. Good to see you. And Susan is. We had some substitutes for people that had traveling scheduling issues, and Susan and Jenny are substitutes for a couple of people. Susan is will attend her son's wedding next week, so she took Jenny's place. Jenny will take whoever is scheduled for next week. So we're moving some of the players around just a little bit. That's what that is about. And welcome, Susan. Thank you for co-hosting this week.
Hi, Bill. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
And thank you, Jenny, for substituting this week for next week. We're making it work. And very excited to talk about this chapter. This is near and dear to me, that there is only one self. And I mentioned last week that Jenny and I did a whole year on this topic. There is only one being. And we went through A Course in Miracles, talking about the different statements and the different context of what's in A Course in Miracles, on the premise that there is only one self. This week's chapter. So, you Course in Miracles students, just kind of perk up and listen in on this idea. It's fundamental to living the awakened experience, I think. And Susan, let's start off with what's your favorite part of this page, this first page, this chapter. Wherever you want to start is fine with me. We're on page 83.
Yeah. So in the question at the top of the page, where the questioner says, I understand that the ego is an illusion, but it seems absolutely real. It feels as if there are two selves in me. So, because it does, doesn't it? It feels like that. It feels as though they're two selves. I'm actually a Gemini, so all my life I've talked about the two selves, being a Gemini, and it does feel like that is the case. And when we go on a spiritual journey, we think maybe I'm this separate self, separate illusory self, and there's this other, capital S self over there at the end of some journey that I'm going to undertake, and I'll get there one day. In some traditions, maybe not even in this lifetime, but there's definitely me here and this other capital S self over there. So to actually have the experience of, no, there is only one self, is life-changing. I think it's the when that piece drops in, that changes everything.
Yes, yeah. That's the piece, and I have to. Rupert was that piece. His teaching and pointing was that piece for me, and then Francis. First I met. It could have been reversed, because Francis is Rupert's. The piece that dropped in for Rupert was Francis Lucille, and that piece is. It's funny. Susan, you and I were talking about this yesterday. It's like it's a dawning on your noticing. It's like it falls in. You can't go and get it, and the more you want it, the more it seems to be fleeting. The more effort that's expressed or that's used, the more it's hidden. And then all of a sudden there's a dawning that you actually are that awareness of experience. It's remarkable how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think we both agreed yesterday that we don't do it. We didn't do it. It
Yes.
it,
Yes.
it dropped in.
Yes.
It wasn't as a result of any effort that we made.
It doesn't, yeah, and this is where the paradox is, because if you don't have, if there's no, and I think Rupert will cover this maybe on the last couple of pages, because there is effort until there's not. The the mind that starts the journey, it goes away, and then all of a sudden there's this, and then it comes back, and you're you're in this, or something.
Yeah.
This is active, but it's not informed from the same old place.
Yeah.
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 What else would you like to look at on this first page?
So his answer to why that sense of self feels real, he says the reason your sense of self feels very real is that there is something that is undeniably true about your sense of yourself. And I like how he goes on to define what's meant by illusion, because I think sometimes this can be really misunderstood. He says, when I suggest the separate self or ego is an illusion, I don't mean to imply that it's non-existent. An illusion is not something that's non-existent. It's something that appears as other than it actually is. It does exist, but it's not what it appears to be. And then obviously he gives some examples of illusions that have reality. The landscape in the movie is an illusion, but its reality is the screen. The water in a mirage is illusory, but the light is its reality. The snake, we see a snake on the path, but then it turns out just to be a rope. In each case, all we're actually seeing is the reality of the illusory object, albeit with an illusion superimposed upon it. I think that's such an important point, that sense of self is the only self there is, but it has the illusion of the body mind imposed upon it, and we fall for that. Think, oh, I'm Susan. Of course, I'm Susan. Who else would I be? But that sense it's the same. It's the illusion, but pointing to the reality of the self. I think that's why Rupert doesn't use capital S's. I've noticed that in his writing, and lots of people use little s and capital S, and Rupert never does that. He only ever uses a little s, and
Right.
you can see why, because he's using that to emphasize the fact there is only one self.
Yes, yes, yes. Because the capital S and the small s is giving a level. It's attempting to describe levels of consciousness, and there are no levels. There seems to be levels for understanding, and the thing that brings you to understanding, it sort of relaxes out of the way once it's satisfied. The mind that's searching, it's always curious and wanting to, what about this and what about that, and you either you give it a bone, or give it a satisfaction of an answer. It relaxes out of the way, and then it's forgotten. It's you don't bring it, you don't see it anymore. It's not in the way. It's not an obstacle that you've attached your identity to any longer.
Yeah.
I was going to say on the illusion, when he's talking about the illusion, all illusions have a reality to them. It's like the illusion is kind of misunderstood by its name, as if it's not real, and I like that pointing that Rupert's using here, because illusion doesn't But a lot of people think that illusion means, oh, that's not true. That didn't happen. And on a relative sense, it sure did happen. The body gets sick. Things happen in the relative sense for the body mind. And in the illusion, the definition of illusion is that we or I isn't what it thought it was. I has appropriated its identity to the construct, to the personality experience. And I don't know, the personality experience isn't a bad thing. It's just not it's not essential to our true self, our true nature.
Yeah. We say the world is an illusion, and sometimes that's taken to mean, it's not there, or but all it means is it's not what it appears to be. It's not peopled by separate entities and things made of matter. It's just consciousness. It's consciousness appearing as something other than consciousness, seeming to appear.
Yeah. Right. And thank you, Patty, for putting your hand up. We'll take. You want to take that question now, or Susan?
Yeah.
Okay, Patty, how you doing?
You need to unmute yourself, Patty. That's it.
When you were both talking about the teachers that helped you to drop in to reality, was there anything that you can remember that came before that? I remember a time when, like a 2-hour period, I just sat in a garden and I was just aware, and it just came out of the blue, and I wanted it to last, so I stayed in the garden. And eventually it faded away, but I can't remember, and it was years ago, I can't remember if there was something I did or said or didn't say that helped that drop in for me. Do you have any sense of that?
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, for me, there had been several kind of episodes over the course of my life where, looking back, I can see that I'd kind of seen something, but then it just closed over again. It's funny, actually, not that long ago, I shared a dream that I'd had with Bill that I'd written down in 2008, and I'd forgotten it, completely forgotten it, and I found it on my phone. And it was really clear, a really clear dream. And Bill actually said to me, the ego just goes, pow, shuts the door again, doesn't want to see that. And I'd actually forgotten. But for me, the real change came when I had come to the end of my ability to find any answers, to create. I'd created a successful life and then lost it all. And there was something about the surrender of just, I don't know how to do this anymore. I know there's something because I've known it since I was a little girl. I know that I'm not this, just this flesh and blood bag of bones. But I'd come to the end of my ability. And that was a very dark, I suppose, dark night of the soul, you would call it. It was a very dark place. And out of that came a completely different way of seeing something. Something I could go into a much longer story, which I'll not here, but something fundamentally changed at that. But I had to come to the end of Susan's ability because I tried really, really, really hard for many years, and that had to stop. That had to end. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. There's so many ways that happens. I like Rupert's description that it's a dawning, that like I mentioned a couple weeks ago when someone mentioned, or he sort of related the dawning of your essential self to a headache. When you have a headache, you have a headache, and then maybe 4 or 5 hours later, when the headache's gone, you don't know when it left. You just know that it's not there anymore. And for me, the first realization, I mean, I've had this epiphany of awareness for over 10 years, where I knew awareness was all there is. I knew that awareness was a fundamental to I am. And that was my experience. I would read and I'd go, all these words, when you can just be present and aware. And I still didn't understand what that meant until I was in a retreat with Rupert, and he, on the third day of his retreats, usually a Monday for a 7-day retreat, he has a morning meditation that takes you deeply into the self-discovery, and you're embodying, you're going into this experience as awareness. And then when you come out of that meditation as awareness, he invites you to include everything in the physical space that you're in. And the first time that happened, I mean, I've been through those meditations before, but there was this meditation where I realized, oh my God, awareness is now including all the objects of experience as one with itself. As these arise, and I could feel it and know it and be it. And that was a turning point for me when I had this, what he calls the tantric experience, where everything is part of this presence and awareness. And then from there, it sort of expands. And I think it's also just my love for the truth as expressed through the teachings of Rupert or Francis or Jean Klein, or the ones that pointed to them are the ones that I was interested in. And of course, this is why we do the book studies, is because it just keeps us immersed in these ideas, and they have a way of overwhelming the mind that keeps trying to pick up the time and space and locating itself as Bill Free. It's just, we stay in the essence of the teaching, and it takes over, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Thanks for that question. It's a good question. And I want to mention that I love what William, hey, William Price, good to see you. I love what he said here at 1208. There's an old saying, this way cannot be found by seeking, but only those who seek find the self. Yeah, it's a paradox, because the seeker goes away. It's like the moth to the flame. And then he said, when the fruit is ripe, it falls from the tree. That's true. Yeah, thank you for that. And Patty says, illusion is simply a temporary appearance and disappearance. Yeah, it's the thing that comes and goes. Exactly. It's the thing that's temporal. And what is aware of that experience is the thing that never, it's always there. It's always present. And then, Melissa, everything we are aware of arises in awareness. Where else could it possibly appear? Yeah. Thank you for those additions to this conversation. Let's see, where were we, Susan?
So at the foot of the first page, he talks about how the aware physical space in the room owes its reality to the unlimited aware space of the universe, but borrows its limitations from the four walls. So the apparently separate self or ego owes its reality to ever-present, unlimited awareness, but borrows its apparent limitations from the qualities of experience with which it seems to be mixed or identified. And what I liked about that paragraph was ever-present, unlimited awareness. That means your reality here, now, right where you are in your current condition. There's no waiting, there's no achieving, there's no anything. There's just the divesting of the limitations. Like if the walls of the room fell down, then the space would not be limited by them. If the walls of our egoic personality just fell down, then we stand revealed as the self.
Yeah. Yep. In the last sentence, he says, it's just, or the last paragraph, this is why everyone's sense of being myself. So when I read that, just being myself, okay, so we pause as that and don't go any further with thought. Just being myself. That was that last book that we did. That's why it was so powerful. This is why everyone's sense of being myself is absolutely and undeniably real. It's just that. In most people's experience, their sense of self is so thoroughly mixed with the content of experience that whilst they always know their self to an extent, they do not know their self clearly. And this is a major distinction in Rupert's teaching. To know yourself clearly is to know yourself as awareness, as this presence that is prior to labels, prior to identity, prior to any kind of add-on description. It's just the isness of as awareness. Is to know the self clearly. And that's the point of the pen of understanding, I think.
Yeah, and that isn't anything other than the sense we have right now of being myself.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you. I'm just really grateful for Rupert, Francis, Krishnamurti, all these great, these sages that they made it so easy for us. And now we have the internet to where we can discuss these matters. Yeah. Okay. You want to turn the page to 84? What did you see on 84?
This is my favorite Rupert metaphor, and he expounds it for pages and pages. So, I just think this is such a clear pointing, this notion of John Smith living a peaceful and fulfilled life at home, but he goes and puts on a costume, assumes a series of thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships, and seems to become King Lear, which is just a description, isn't it, of what's happening, that consciousness freely assumes our temporary form of Susan, takes on all the thoughts and feelings and conditioning and habits and all of that stuff without ever ceasing to be consciousness.
Yes.
And then it's like a big game, isn't it? It forgets, and then it thinks, I'm going to remember again.
Yes. I think this is a powerful metaphor of how this bodysuit this Bill bodysuit, that Susan bodysuit, whoever you are, your name bodysuit. It is just an avatar. It's a character in this play of consciousness. And what's funny is that we all somehow we become the character, and we think we're this.
Yeah.
And that's cool. I mean, here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with that. It's consciousness is this Bill, Jenny, Susan, Patty. This is all the play of this intentional God self that's revealed itself like this in flesh and blood. Looks like flesh and blood, but it's not. Thankfully, all of those paradigms, all of those Bible stories, I'm so grateful they're all false. Because what we're learning and what we're understanding now is that we can actually touch. When we touch this, we're touching God. When we touch this, we're touching God. When we breathe, we're breathing God, and it's not separate from I am. It's the same myself as what God is. I know that's blasphemy for a lot of people, but sorry. It's more reasonable. Yeah. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I was just reading a comment. Noni said, the King Lear rendering has never helped me be clear about the teaching. For our lives, we don't end a performance. We're in and out of awareness of self through our experiences, thoughts, etc. I think it's more the identification, like while the experiences are going on for the body mind, where is the identification? In his metaphor, are you identified with John Smith consciousness, or are you identified with your own body mind?
Yeah. It's not the first time I've seen or heard people having trouble with that rendering, because you have to somehow it comes in for some people in a different way. This is why he uses a dozen different metaphors and like the screen and the movie and the just being present as awareness and watching the objects of experience, and just pick one, because this bodysuit is just an object of experience, and you are that which is aware of the experience. So there's so many different ways that it could be brought in and understand. If you only have one, that's it. That's the one. That's enough.
And he says, he meaning John Smith, loses himself in his own creativity, and as a result, his knowledge of himself as John Smith is temporarily obscured by the belief and feeling that he is King Lear. So consciousness is losing itself in its own creativity. It's creating all of these temporary manifestations and forgetting temporarily. But I think that's such great news, isn't it? That John Smith is temporarily obscured. Eventually, we'll all remember it. Consciousness will remember itself through each of us.
Yeah, the the idea that that we are awareness. It doesn't come to you when you're 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, or you have to have there has to be some cognition and some intellectual understanding and an ability to learn, and these faculties, when they come in, I don't know how it works for others, because Aborigines, the different Indian tribes and the different shamans and all of these other teachings, they use different modalities of teaching to come into that mind. So it doesn't mean that this is the only way. This is just the way that the intellectual, mental person, the mind of the ones that have a computer and can dial into Zoom, and this comes in through our filter where it's understandable. But I think everyone has I don't think you need words. Some people come in through music and Reiki and other vibrational frequency modalities. So I think this is just one way of the many. So this King Lear, I love this King Lear scenario so much that I'm considering hiring actors for our documentary to put King Lear and John Smith in documentary movie as a play, so we can see it played out role playing. I think that would be cool.
You might have to have, it just occurred to me that you might have to just have one actor, though, playing both parts. Same face,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's the same, it's the same self.
You might have to put a call out for an orb to come in.
But a what?
Orb. An
What's
orb. John Smith is an orb. Only I'm just kidding.
I don't know.
So at the bottom of the page, the last paragraph on page 84, Rupert says, in the same way, the unlimited awareness that we essentially are becomes mixed up in or identified with the content of experience. And the content of experience is we get mixed up with personal self-identity. Yeah. That's it.
I just wanted to point out something in the previous paragraph.
Okay.
It plays into what you've just said. And somebody on the board said Rupert had recommended substituting your own name for King Lear. So I'll just substitute my name as I read this paragraph. So it would say, as such, Susan is an imaginary person, an illusory self, created by the mixture of consciousness with certain thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships. However, from her own perspective, Susan believes and feels that she's a real person, and she suffers accordingly. Susan is right to feel she is real, but she wrongly attributes that reality to herself as an independently existing person, forgetting that her sense of herself is derived solely from the reality of consciousness. So the bit I wanted to highlight there was, it's only in misidentification as the separate Susan that suffering occurs. Experiences might happen, but there's no suffering if there's no identification as this Susan who thinks it shouldn't be happening.
Yes. Yeah. The I remains in place, just the I without attachment. It's only when it's given attachment of identity that it can suffer.
Yeah.
That's great. And just as John Smith, the last paragraph, just as John Smith clothes itself, or consciousness clothes itself in thoughts, feelings, and activities, and seems as a result to become King Lear or Susan, so we, awareness, clothe ourselves in experience and seem to become a temporary finite self. The temporary finite self that we seem to be feels very real because it is real. Its reality is ever-present, unlimited awareness. That's the thing that's real. That's the thing that's eternal presence. Our true nature, what does he say? Our true nature takes on the identity of something else. It's so that true nature is never not there.
Yeah, exactly. It's here now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
You know it.
it's not the face that looks at you in a mirror, but it's the essence as awareness. It's awareness that doesn't even see a face. It just is. It doesn't need a mirror.
Yeah.
All that is unreal, or more accurately, illusory about it, are the limitations we ascribe to it. These limitations are imaginary. They are superimposed by thought onto the reality of ourself, or I would say of self, just self.
Yeah.
And we've moved to page 85. Anything else? You want to highlight what's next on this page, Susan?
Yes. I was quite surprised, but initially by this next one, because we hear this all the time, and I've said it many times. Rupert says, suggesting that you get occasional glimpses of your true nature is like suggesting that King Lear gets occasional glimpses of John Smith. And I thought, but we do get glimpses of our true nature. We do. But then when I read on, it's not King Lear. So it's not Susan who has the glimpses or comes to know consciousness. It's awareness being aware of itself. Susan's not doing anything.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got
It's
the
that it's where the mind comes in and says that I'm doing that's happening to me.
Yeah.
It's like nanosecond fast, right? And it's that impulse that it's where choice happens too. Choice doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
I think it does. I mean, this is a record playing where the mind keeps wanting to pick up and go, well, wait a minute, I have free will. Nope.
Yeah. I like the image that Francis Lucille uses, that it's like a clown coming onto the stage to take the bow when actually the applause was for the ballerina who had just performed. I think that's just,
Yeah.
because we claim it, don't we? It's like, I choose my thoughts. No, you don't. But we claim it, and as you said, a nanosecond later.
Yeah. Identity wants to hold its place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Kim, it was Francis Lucille who said the thing about the clown and the ballerina.
Yeah.
I heard it on a YouTube video.
I've heard Jenny talk about it.
Yeah. I'm sure Jenny heard it from Francis too.
Yeah. It's in the third paragraph on page 85, where it starts with John Smith. It says, John Smith is always knowing himself, but his knowledge of himself is mixed with certain thoughts, feelings, activities, and relationships, and therefore he ceases to know himself clearly. Here's that clearly part again, and I seem to focus on it. It says he knows himself partially, for even his belief in himself as King Lear is really his knowledge of himself as John Smith, albeit veiled and dimmed. And this is where, those glimpses there, it's if we identify who the glimpses are happening for, if we identify that, it's just awareness being aware of itself. It's just those are the glimpses, and then of course the body mind says, "Oh, I had a glimpse."
Because of my 20-year meditation practice.
Yes.
Just, as Rupert says at the end, is not the case.
Right.
Although it doesn't hurt, I don't think. I said to somebody one day, if you want to eat sushi, you don't go to McDonald's. So actually, doing spiritual practices and being in this environment does seem to have some, it can maybe, I don't know, maybe ripens you or does something.
Well, it's like this though. When I interviewed Francis Lucille for a few conferences back, he in the this was pre-conference kind of a discussion. He said, "You didn't choose to be here. I didn't choose to be here. This is just happening." And so when this bodysuit came in, or this thing called Bill, when it came in, Bill's parents didn't choose that Bill shows up. It's just that it's like somehow this play of consciousness that dropped in as Bill, it has the play in the sandbox, and this is what it looks like. And Bill doesn't have anything to do with it, or his parents. Yeah. It's all consciousness playing in the sandbox. Oh. I know that sounds scary, right? The last paragraph in that section before on page 85, above the price of name and form, it says, Rupert says, so there is no question of two selves, talking about the King, Lear, John Smith. There's no question of two selves, one either knowing or not knowing the other. There is just yourself. There's only this I am. And it's the same I am. It's not a different I am for anything else. There is just yourself, ever present, unlimited awareness, either partially veiling itself with its own activity of thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving, and seeming as a result to be a temporary finite self, or ceasing to veil itself and thus knowing itself as it essentially is. And this is right now. This is I am awareness. This I am awareness that we bring attention to. It's the same I am awareness. It's the one self.
Yep. Ever present, unlimited awareness, expressing through each one of us the same awareness.
Yeah. And each one of us is also that. Each one of these filtered things in bodysuits, it's also awareness. Because there's only one self. There's not even the dark side, the ugly side, the things that we're all of those things, they're still the same awareness. Yeah. I mean, they're not essential, but they are arising out of that same essence.
Yeah, and it's only from this side, from the body mind side, that they're labeled bad or dark or whatever. They're just judgments that the body mind makes up from its conditioning.
Yeah. Okay, should we go on? Are there some any comments we want to look at on the board? We have we have 30 minutes left before we finish. I think we have plenty of time. We have 4 more pages. Maybe we should keep going.
Yeah. Yes. So
the price of name and form.
Yes, so the question there is, does this mean that as long as I seem to be a separate self and have experiences, I will have problems and suffer? So we've already touched on this. Rupert says experience itself is not problematic. It's our identification with it that's problematic. And then he goes on to talk on the next page on 86 about, I love that little section that the friend comes to speak to John Smith in costume, and he says, "Why are you so unhappy?" And King Lear recounts his troubles with his daughters, his kingdom, and the war with France. "You're not miserable for any of those reasons," his friend remonstrates. "You're miserable because you've forgotten who you really are. Who are you really?" just so
Yes.
clear. Isn't it? It's just so clear. It's why one of us is unhappy, because we've forgotten who we are.
Yeah. And this is why these simple little, these reminders, these book studies, this is why just pausing as awareness and resting in peace. I used to think that belonged on a tombstone.
R.I.P.
Right? Yeah. Just resting as presence and awareness. It's the thing that resolves everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Self-resolving. It's so simple. We don't see it right away.
Yeah.
It says at the top. We're at the top of. We're moving to page 86. And where did you leave off on what you just read, Susan?
I read that. It's the third paragraph on 86 I read there.
Oh, okay. Why are you unhappy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because and then he talks about, his daughters and the war with France.
Right. And here in the last paragraph on that page, this is something I've heard Rupert say many times. There is nothing extraordinary or mysterious about the recognition I am John Smith, or I am. I would just say I am. And knowing, or at least just investigating, what is I am for you. I am can't be something different for anyone. It's the same I am.
Yeah.
I am John Smith. It is not some new knowledge that John Smith acquires. On the contrary, all that has happened is that his previous ignorance of himself has been removed. In fact, knowing himself as John Smith, or as awareness, knowing itself, is the most intimate, ordinary, and familiar experience he or she has. It was, or it has. It was simply obscured on account of his immersion in or identification with the content of experience. And this is where all of us are. I mean, nobody's not here. We come in as these body-mind persons, and babies, young adult, teenagers, young adults, and then older, and so everyone comes in through the same faculty. Every once in a while, there's some kind of a special thing, like the Dalai Lama or sages in India. Usually not in the U.S. do you see that happen, but all of us come through the same egoic identity. And thankfully, there's. I'm thankful that consciousness chose this lifetime for Bill to disconnect from the matrix. But we all get to go through it, so it's not a bad thing to be a body mind.
No.
And it's not a bad thing for anyone else to be a body mind, or to think, because I'm an old evangelist. I used to think everyone needs to know this. Hurry up.
Yeah. Well, I felt that when with that bit that I just read, to be able to, it would be good to be able to say to people, although I wouldn't do that, but you're not miserable for the reason you think,
Right. Yeah.
You're just miserable because you've forgotten who you are. Who are you?
Yes.
I think the bit in what you read that really I just want to emphasize over and over again is that knowing the self is the most intimate, ordinary, and familiar experience you already have right now. It's not some exotic thing in the future. It's just your sense of self right now, without the identification with the body mind. And Kathleen said, does it help to keep asking who's thinking, feeling and sensing? And Jenny answered, Francis recommends that we don't keep asking anything as it becomes mechanical. The approach he recommends is to go directly to what you are, the sense of being, the knowing I am, that intimate, ordinary, familiar experience each one of us has right now.
Yeah.
When we say, I am.
Yeah. It's the efforting that it obstructs the dawning, the opening. It's the seeking if these ideas from Francis or Rupert, or the ideas that are discussed right here, is to let go of seeking, and the essential self dawns on itself. It finds itself as you just take your hand off, just relax and allow and welcome. And these words that are being used are just pointers to allowing the dawning to occur of its own.
Yeah. Yeah. Anna says, could the belief that I don't know who I am cause me suffering? Is it true that I actually do know, but I tell myself that I don't? Yes. Yes, because it is the most intimate, ordinary, familiar experience that you have. But somehow we've gained this idea, often from lots of spiritual study, that it's something else, that it's not just this sense of I am.
Well, in Revelation 2, with the statement that Anna made, could the belief that I don't know who I am cause me suffering? And now that question right there is revealing itself right now in real time. And what does Anna do with that is what makes all the difference. Don't touch it. You see, so this conversation, this dialogue, you brought you here for this belief to raise its identity. Now don't touch it. Just, oh, okay, there's a belief that I don't know who I am causing me suffering. Is it true that I actually do not know, but I tell myself I... So you just look at all of those thoughts, all of those ideas like passing clouds. You don't log in. You just do what Francis recommends, which is rest in I am, and see the activity of the actor called Anna Barton. just see it and don't touch it.
Jenny has made a really nice distinction in response to Anna's question. She said, actually, we don't know what we are. We just know that we are. So that intimate, familiar sense of I am, I know I am, I know I exist. I know that the consciousness is here, but we don't know what that is. If we think we know what we are, we'll be conceptualizing ourselves as an object. As Jean Klein says, live in not knowing, which is the title of Jenny's podcast for the Awareness podcast series.
Yeah, for you that don't know, we haven't announced it here. Jenny has taken on one of our awareness. We do 4 podcasts a month, the awareness podcast, and Jenny is one of our new podcasters. Thank you, Jenny.
First episode live this Friday. Next
Awesome.
Friday. Next week on Friday.
Yeah. So just want to announce that Jenny is we just reached out and asked her if she would take that spot. Jackie Greggs had to let it go because of her busyness in her own the business that she's in, and Jenny took that on. So thank you for that. And you guys that aren't listening to that podcast, you have myself, Susan, Cindy, and now Jenny Beal. So you can listen to her live, or not live, but pre-recorded live, hear her voice and what she has to say instead of just being typed on the board here. Thank you. Where else? What else are we looking at here? We're on page 87 still.
Yeah. The next paragraph, all of King Lear's suffering arises on behalf of himself, the one whom he believes is being disrespected and maltreated by his daughters. However, if he looks inside, this is really important, I think. If he looks inside himself, he undoubtedly finds thoughts and feelings, but he does not find the mistreated man, the suffering self, on whose behalf they arise. So to personalize that, Susan might think she is being badly treated or whatever, and I can find thoughts and feelings that can justify that. But when I look at on whose behalf do they arise, who is the Susan? It's just a collection of beliefs. There's no mistreated person. There's no person.
Right.
And that's really important.
Well, and the other part of that is that you don't change your behavior to find John Smith. You just rest in the awareness of on whose behalf. Just rest right there as awareness, as I am, and see the activity, the busy activity of Susan or King Lear or the bodysuit identity.
And yet, Rupert does say that there is a process. If that recognition doesn't happen, he says, after tracing his way back through the layers of experience, discarding anything that's not essential, then there is the recognition, I am John Smith, I am consciousness.
Right.
And then that's the immediate end, because in the identification as consciousness and the disidentification as Susan, suffering ends. You don't have to go through 20 years of therapy. Once that's disidentified with, it just falls apart like a house of cards, unless we decide to pick it back up again. But then you notice that, like, I've identified back as Susan again. The signal, it's great how the signal is a loss of peace and joy. What am I believing? Believing I'm Susan again.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's funny about the paradox of all of this is that even though it looks like we're talking to bodysuits with identities, this is all consciousness speaking to itself about itself, and it's somehow it's cluing in, and I don't know how this works, but somehow there's some kind of impulses that where we talk about it.
Yep.
And it looks like the bodysuit does something like, don't do this. Who are we speaking to? We can't be speaking to this. It's crazy.
Just having fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say, thank you, Jenny, for dropping that link for the podcast in there for everyone. And let's go down to 87, the last two paragraphs. The same happens with our self-awareness. It is awareness itself that freely assumes the activities of thinking and perceiving without actually ceasing to be itself. There is nothing inherently problematic about doing so. Indeed, it enables experience to take place. Without clothing itself in the activities of thought and perceptions, awareness would not be able to perceive or participate in the world. However, this comes at a price. In so doing, the formless, unconditioned presence of awareness seems to become qualified by and subject to the limitations of experience. Awareness loses itself, or seems to lose itself, in experience. This identification of the presence of awareness, wish of awareness with the qualities of experience constitutes the separate self or ego around whom most people's lives revolve. And that's just, I mean, that's everything in a nutshell.
Yep.
There's a lot of good stuff on page 88. You want to look at that?
Yeah. Right at the top, he says, all psychological suffering takes place on behalf of this apparently separate self or ego. So think about that. All psychological suffering. So when there's no identification with the apparently separate self, there's no psychological suffering. They're completely bound together. It's just arises from that identification. And that's amazing freedom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That,
and then go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say that's the price that nameless, formless reality of unlimited awareness pays. So in order to have any experience, formless awareness has to manifest as temporary forms in order to have the experiences through us. But the price is the forgetting.
Yeah.
And the psychological suffering that comes from the forgetting.
Yeah. And that sort of that diminishes. It becomes less and less the reclaiming of self, or the losing itself in experience, or it becomes less and less because it becomes more primary, on the forefront.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm noticing in myself and others that are on this path, in this understanding. It's less and less. And I've heard Rupert and Francis and other teachers speak of it.
Yeah. And he says in the next paragraph, I love when he says, it is only necessary. My ears prick up at these points. It's only necessary for the apparently separate self to investigate itself, discarding anything that's not essential to it, until its essential, irreducible reality of pure awareness is revealed. So what comes and goes? What are the things that are coming and going, and yet there's something that remains when thoughts and feelings fluctuate and go, and then some, things happen and then they go, and yet there's something here that is just never changed. That's what's essential. And it's that's the exploration, isn't it? To really look at what is it that comes and goes, and what is it that still stays. I am that, and that which never changes is unaffected. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what it is that we're dealing with, whether it's a personal issue, a worry, a fear, a health issue, a body experience that is debilitating or uncomfortable, painful. All of those things are the things that come and go, because this comes and goes. Yes. This goes away.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a great question for the last question of this chapter. It says, if the separate self is an illusion, I'm having trouble reading that. You want to read that?
Yes. If the separate self is an illusion, what sense does it make to suggest that it should engage in some kind of spiritual practice or investigation? And he says we could argue that it's meaningless to suggest a practice or a method to an illusory self, for the self that seeks happiness is like a wave in the ocean in search of water. Indeed, one could even contend that any such practice would further substantiate its illusory existence. And that's an important point too. And I'm sure it's something that probably everybody here has done. The ego goes on the spiritual search, and all that happens is you create a spiritual ego who thinks it's going to achieve something. So it can actually solidify that separate sense. But then he goes on, so you would think, oh, well, I won't do anything then. But then he says that may be true from an absolute point of view, but it's unlikely that John Smith would have disentangled himself from his identity as King Lear without help. So as a concession to the illusory self, it's legitimate and indeed necessary to suggest that he explore his true nature or practice self-inquiry. And I mean, obviously, some people have spontaneous awakenings. That happens. People do just wake up. But then he addresses that in the next paragraph. He says, it's extremely unusual for that to happen, to spontaneously extricate yourself from the drama of experience and recognize the unlimited nature, not to mention abide stably. And I think that's another phrase that's really important, because we can have these awakenings, but then we need to integrate that to be able to abide stably in that, because there's, in coarse language, there's purification that needs to happen as the body mind continues to do its thing, and we don't it doesn't seem to be that we immediately just abide as what we've realized, and he says that some intervention is needed.
And that comes in many ways. It comes by, like in Rupert's example, there was a suggestion. King Lear needed a suggestion, and it wasn't really King Lear, even though he was the actor. John Smith needed a suggestion through the avatar King Lear. It was really only John Smith that got the information, but King Lear seems to be the vehicle of the transmission. It's really not. And each one of us, we came here, we follow Rupert or whatever we're pulled. There's an intuition. Well, that intuition is coming from I am to itself, that thinks it's a bodysuit.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he says that although the recognition of our true nature cannot be caused by any activity or the cessation of any activity of the mind, if we prematurely subscribe to the belief that there's nothing we can do to bring about the end of our suffering, and we don't engage in some investigation or practice, we'll tend to remain immersed in a habitual cycle of seeking and resisting, punctuated by brief periods of peace and joy. And that, I think, again, that's an experience that many of us may have had of having periods of peace and joy and clarity, only for it all to seem to rev back up again. I think it's like a fan, when you unplug a fan, it still spins for a while as it loses the momentum. So the body mind, all the habitual conditioning still seems to run for a little while. And in that period of time, practices are often beneficial. I mean, you've said, Bill, that the direct path is the best way for having a realization, but often going back to a progressive path can be beneficial during the purification phase.
Yeah, I actually think that's what happens even on the direct path. I think, those conversations that we have with Rupert or Francis or Adyashanti or any of those satsangs or Muji, those questions are revealing their self-inquiry. They're a progressive path of divesting from the identity of the personal self. They're all doing that. And in fact, when I interviewed Stephen Bodian for, I don't know, one of the last conferences, he said that after waking up, we wake down. There's something that is referred to as waking down, and it's really that once an awakening occurs, then you see from a different vantage point, and you learn through these through the different teachings, how to navigate this new understanding.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's in chakra work as well. That's important because an awakening opens the crown chakra, and the waking down is the clearing or purification of, in a descending order, in order to ground and embody the awakening.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, when I look at the teachers around the world, because I'm always looking for the conferences, I'm looking for the documentary, I'm looking for who has cutting edge content and presenting these ideas. It looks to me like there's this awakening has taken on a higher level of awareness on a global scale. And that's why you're seeing these new documentaries. We watched one the other night, everyone. I mentioned to Susan yesterday, it's called Chasing Presence. It's so good. It just came out on Apple, and it's such a good film. It's like $4 to watch it for within 48 hours, or $12 to buy it. But it's cutting edge. It's what's that? Russell Brand is one of the main people in this film, and some other great non-dual teachers. But this teaching is taking the world, is really consciousness waking up in a big scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on the last page 89. We have one paragraph left. There's just one sentence that starts with therefore, after what Susan just read. Therefore, as a compassionate concession to the apparently separate self or ego that most of us believe and feel ourselves to be, the religious and spiritual traditions elaborate practices or pathways which lead towards the recognition of our true nature. That is, they take us from the self we seem to be to the self that we essentially are, from suffering to happiness. Some of these practices give the apparently separate self an activity to undertake with the intention of gradually purifying it until it is sufficiently refined to merge into the source, into its source. Others, I'm having trouble reading that.
I'll read it. Others attempt to undermine the apparently separate self by refusing to recommend any practice that could be appropriated by it and used to validate and substantiate its illusory existence. So on one hand, there are traditions that give you a practice to do until you become sufficiently refined enough to have a realization. Others say, no practices, because it would just be the ego that's doing it. It'll strengthen the ego. And then his kicker at the end is others, such as the approach suggested here, recommend going directly to the heart of the matter and investigating the self we believe ourselves to be, thereby revealing its inherently peaceful and unconditionally fulfilled nature. So, but what is that essential self that never moves as everything else comes and goes?
Yeah. Yes. A great way to wrap this up. We're 2 minutes from our end of this time together. Thank you all for being here. And next week is Jenny Beal. She'll be substituting for who, I forget who was supposed to take that spot. But we'll be looking at chapter 12. Who is it that suffers? And one final thing on chasing the present. Rupert is one of the interviews. He gives some really great commentary, or it comes. He's a real great add to that film. So, Susan, anything else you want to look at?
No, I don't think so. I think the
Okay.
only thing The only thing that I would say is just re-emphasizing that it's here now, and we can look for ourselves to see what comes and goes and what doesn't come and go.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't need to wait.
Don't need to wait. Don't need to suffer. You can stay actually, suffering, I think it's also residual. I think suffering sort of, it resolved. This awareness, aware presence is like the solve of consciousness unto itself. It's this aware presence is like, it's everything. That's why it's the peace of God. Be still and know I am God. In this stillness of quiet presence, that's where everything is resolved, and we self-realize right there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lindsay, for dropping that link in for the movie, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.